I just want to ask a quick few questions. Any of you here having your own companies like startups or part of a company, startup company? Good. Anyone of you actually want to start a company? I'm sure pretty much, right? So this topic of mine is actually the original experience I had when we started the company Mobilitas Technologies, which is about 6 months old. And so what I'm going to talk today is mainly about the needs of a startup company. Every one of us, when we actually start building the whole company, we start off with saying, okay, let's start jumping into the code, let's start creating a product and so on. Now that would actually take you only to a small extent, wherein like, okay, you have got a prototype running, you'll start talking to the venture capitalists and so on, and then after that, you'll start creating a product. And then comes the releases, you have to deliver it to your customers. And then finally comes the point about, there are lots of things that you have to manage in terms of IT infrastructure, right? Now what I'm trying to say, so we have actually, when we started the company, definitely for us the product is the main focus. But at the same time, this one aspect that we did not give up, which is setting up the whole infrastructure around us so that it will actually take us much, much beyond what we are actually aiming to, right? So taking that experience of mine, I just prepared a presentation for the OSI days here, and I have come up with few option solutions for you as a startup company, and then what you can do and what are the options you have before yourself. And I also have put up small statistics of what we have done and what is the ROI we have got after that, right? So so my background was actually given. So like I said, I was a co-founder and chief technology officer of Mobilitas Technologies. And before that, I was actually working for Intel, Nokia. And I was responsible at Intel for developing and architecting the device drivers for the Intel hardware. And at Nokia for designing and developing the phones that, the N9s and the N900 and 810 and 800 before that. And all my life I've been with Linux. I've started off with Solaris to actually begin with, but after immediately we switched to Linux, and I've been working with Linux all the way until now. Right? So, first of all, when you actually talk about a startup, I mean, what are the main things that you actually, as a startup, you want to imbibe in your company, right? First and the foremost is agility. Without agility, I mean, not being a big company and not having the money that you actually can drive yourself and your team members along with you, agility is the foremost and the topmost importance of your company. You have to be agile, you have to be able to create things, try often, and fail fast. You don't have the luxury of actually trying to spend 6 months just to try to create one single idea, and then after 6 months you'll realize, oh no, actually we have done something wrong, and not in terms of technology, but in terms of customer requirements, and then you actually go back all the way and then redo it. No, you don't have that flexibility, being a startup, right? The next thing is the fast prototyping. You have to deliver things really fast, check quickly. I mean, you can have your own ways of checking it quickly, but then you really have to do a fast prototyping, right? And the most important thing, I should have actually put this point to the beginning, which is the cost. Every startup company is cost conscious and will be cost conscious. I mean, most of the guys in startups, they either spend their own money to actually build the company, right? Or they actually go to the venture capitalists, and if you actually go to the venture capitalists, you have your own ways of doing it. I mean, you are either driven by the VCs themselves most of the times, because they actually hold the control in terms of how you do it and what you do it, right? So cost is a major important factor. So my topic also talks about that one, because at the end of the day, you don't want to create an infrastructure in terms of spending lots of money and then spend lots of money as you go along. So how do you reduce the cost is the most important aspect here. Time to market. You have to hit the market at the right time and the right place, right? So time to market is a very important thing. Developer collaboration, and when you have a small team, right, you might have, let's say, 3 to 4 developers, right? But right from the beginning, if you're able to set the stage for the developers to collaborate easily, right, from developing the code to writing unit test cases to integration testing to the final code integration, continuous integration part, right? If you're able to streamline the whole thing, then it actually sets the stage for scaling up very high to whatever product you actually create, right? So developer collaboration for your software is very important, right? And open source, I mean, again, There were those days earlier when if you want to actually set up your whole systems, you really had to buy expensive software, right? You all the way from documentation to emails to whatnot. Along with the hardware comes the software cost, right? But then open source has actually changed the whole paradigm. And people earlier, when I actually started looking at the open source, it was pretty tricky because there was less documentation. Things were not still stabilized, but you still can get your work done if you know what and how to do it, right? But now if you actually take any open source component nowadays, it's as good or even better than any other commercial software, frankly speaking, right? It's got really good documentation, and the most important, it actually has got really good support in terms of the community support, as well as support from the members who actually maintain the open source component, right? So using open source is a very straightforward choice for us, for any startup, frankly speaking, right? And then is the next revolution that you might have actually been listening since some time. It might be a hype word, it might be anything that you might have heard about, is a cloud computing, right? Again, like the previous presentation, cloud might actually mean a different thing for different people. But cloud basically means that if you now actually have to deploy your services for IT infrastructure specifically, or any of the services for that matter, you really have to buy a hardware piece earlier, right? And then you have to deploy the software, buy the network bandwidth, buy the hard disks, set up a backup UPS for power backup and all this stuff. You can just get rid of all of that, and then you actually can use the cloud infrastructure available out there, and then you can set up the whole thing in just clicks. If not minutes, then just maximum 1 hour, right? So deploying the cloud is the most important factor in the whole elements of a startup. And I think these elements make up a startup running smoothly right from the beginning, right? Right, so let's assume that you actually have a very few people to start. That's how startups start. You have maximum 4, 5 guys or maximum 10 guys, right? So you can get done all your daily work with just maybe a few documents, notepads, I don't know, and then email. You can use your own personal email, but then typically also companies have their own email infrastructure set up, right? And these two things could, frankly speaking, get your things up and running. So small teams can actually survive, and there shouldn't be any big problem there, right? But let's assume that your team is actually growing. It's growing really fast, and your product has become really successful, right? And then how do you scale up? Can email and documents and small places and some hard disk somewhere where you're storing the documents can help? No, right? This is a very standard problem that companies have faced since a long time. You have created all those heavy documents, you put them somewhere, and now after some time you really want to find out which document has got which piece of information, how do you want to search it, and so on. It's a very traditional problem, and then people have actually got vexed with it, and they have spent huge amounts of money just to kind of manage the kind of legacy infrastructure, right? So as the number of people keep on growing in your organization, you cannot do it just with few bunch of documents and everything. You need a very seamless, smooth interaction between all the employees in your company, no matter what. You should be able to find the documents you need. Email should be very easy to use. Configuration should be used. I should be able to share the documents between the people and all that stuff, right? So a smoothly working machinery is an absolute must for a startup going forward, because you cannot concentrate your efforts on maintaining the IT infrastructure, but rather you have to concentrate the efforts on your goals. And the final goal is not the IT infrastructure, the final goal is actually the product you are deemed as a startup to actually create, right? So focus on your goals, and then just set up the IT infrastructure once and then leave it out. That should be the aim of any company, right? So what are the various infrastructure needs? So actually we have talked about, okay, we need all the IT infrastructure and all that stuff. So this is what, at least we as a company in Mobilitas, when we started off, we thought are the key elements that are necessary, that are needed for a startup, and that are actually needed for us to actually go along, right? So the first one is, I just put a small pictures here. That employee manager thing that you're actually seeing there is nothing but it's employee management, right? You have a bunch of employees. How you can actually add employees? How do you actually find the connections with the employees? Because at the end of the day, this also drives whom you actually share the documents with, who has access to the source code, and so all that stuff, right? And the next picture is about source code itself, right? The most important piece of any software startup. how do you manage the source code? How does it go through the review, right? And how does it go through the unit testing process? How does it go to the code, final code merge, integration tested, right? And all that stuff. And no matter what, right, every piece of software you agree or do not agree has got a bunch of bugs that you really have to fix. And you have to keep track of them, triage them, and then fix them. So a bug cycle has got its own way of managing itself, right? And then you need the documents. And the other thing that everyone has been talking about, and then everyone agrees that is a must in today's world, is agility, right? We just talked about it some time back. So agile management or scrum management of your projects, right? You might actually today start off with one single product for a single customer, but tomorrow you might have to actually fork the product for 2 different customers, or actually you have started to build up your own third product, right? How do you manage the various products? How do you manage the various scrum process? So agile management is again one thing that and maybe you can do with a small team with Excel sheets and documents and stuff, but as you keep on growing, it becomes really heavy and it becomes really impossible for you to manage. You just need dedicated people to manage only the scrum process, which a startup cannot manage, right? Or afford. And then you need a mechanism to do a continuous integration, right? The moment you, as a developer, you push a code for merging with your upstream code, you need a process that kickstarts the build process, builds the final image that needs to be tested, and then gets tested automatically. Some automation tests run, and maybe some smoke tests also run, right? And then it finally delivers a test report for you. All this has to happen automatically, right? You cannot have people just go there and then kickstart some process to start up the build, try to do the manual merge and all that stuff. No, that's definitely something you cannot do. And then you need a test process, right? I mean, earlier we used to have a huge bunch of people, just armies of testing folks who just take the bill, start running all those functional tests. That also is not good. So but anyway, testing is a process that has to happen. Validation is something that has to happen in a process, right? And then you need emails, and then of course, as a software open source company, you really also need a collaboration tool, right? Collaboration in terms of how you actually communicate with the other guys. Email is not a very good way of communicating with people, right? Nowadays you have collaboration in terms of wikis, blogs, IRC, or IM instant messaging and all that stuff, right? So these are the various infrastructure needs that are a must, right? But at the same time, you might actually have more needs. But this is something that we thought we as a startup company need to begin with. But your mileage might actually vary and you need many more things. And you can keep on adding them, right? So your mileage might actually vary. So after telling all this, you might actually feel then, okay, what are the options that I have as a startup company before myself? Which direction should I go, right? So obviously there are 2 choices. You either go with a ready-made solution available off the shelf, right? Or the other solution which I'm going to talk about is the do-it-yourself, right? Now if you say off-the-shelf ready-made solutions, there are quite many of them available out there, right? And with the cloud way of computing and all that stuff, there are many companies which offer you software where you don't have to have your own hardware, or you don't have to have an installable image that you can install in your systems, but you just buy a piece of infrastructure or real estate from their systems, and then you have to basically pay as you go, right? They typically have a mechanism where you have to pay on a user basis. 0 to 5 users, maybe it's free. 5 to 10 users, you have to pay some amount, and so on and so forth, right? So there are a bunch of cloud-based systems available out there, and believe me, most of them are actually built on top of open source technologies, right? So I just named a few here. So you can just go with, for example, Scrumworks, Atlassian, Jira. I mean, Atlassian is a company that basically provides a Jira, which is one of the tools that basically provides your agile management requirements, testing, some part of testing. They also have a Bonabo or Bamboo, something like that, which basically does the whole integration testing. So companies have started providing this kind of complete infrastructure for you, right? So you can make use of that. And then Google Apps for Business. Now, sometime back there was this presentation from Google India. I mean, Google India has given a presentation in Bangalore here, in fact, where they said that they have this Google Apps. 0 to 10 users is absolutely free of cost. The 11th user onwards, you have to pay for all the 11 users, right? So you can also use that. And Google itself provides a lot of good infrastructure. In fact, it provides a way of emails, documents, photographs, Google Drive, and so on. So you can make use of that. Microsoft has got its own 365, where you can use Microsoft's documentation on the cloud. Zoho is one of the other companies which provides infrastructure on the cloud, right? And then all of them, right? I mean, for a small startup which start off with just 4 to 5 people, you would be just happy that, okay, I'm getting everything for free, let me just try it out, right? And then you cannot get away from that. You just stick with it for a very long time and just have to keep on paying the money, right? Because once you're into developing your product, you cannot defocus from that and then start doing something on the IT part, right? And typically the cost of these product, if you actually start off using them, it ranges anywhere from $5 or actually $4 per user until about $8 per user per month, right? So all of these actually cost money after a specific number of users. But of course, if your company is doing open source work, right, which is giving away source code for free, then of course there are other options available, like for example GitHub, right? It provides free of cost hosting of source code as long as it is open source, right? But I mean, come on, any startup company which wants to make money, do you want to really give up your source code? Maybe not in the beginning, but maybe later. I don't know, depends, right? But those are the options that you have in front of you. So just to kind of recap on the positives and the negatives of ready-made solutions. And there's nothing like positives means positives for me, but they may actually be good negatives for you or the other way around, right? So positives are definitely like easy to start with. You don't have to do anything there. Just like any email registration or account registration somewhere else, just go to the website, punch in your data, create a username and password, and then you're done, right? And then use a credit card to pay the money, and that's it. There's very little, zero or less maintenance in terms of what you would do as you go along, right? And then the support is readily available. If you have any issues with setting up things, then there is enough support from the company where you're buying the stuff that they can help you out with, right? And there are also a bunch of negatives, right? I mean, as a company that we have analyzed. So the solutions available are in bits and pieces, right? And there's no integrated coherent solution. What that basically means is take all the pieces that I've shown earlier, create an integrated coherent solution, and then sell it as business. Why not, right? And then most of them are actually available for free of cost for up to a limited number of users. We talked about that, but it actually ends up as costly in the long run. $6 per month per user for 100 persons as you go along is good amount of money, I would say, right? For the small number of users, maybe it is not, but then after that it starts to pinch a bit. And then tie-in is one thing, again, we are a bit scared of. I mean, you might actually start using their infrastructure, but after a period of time, you get locked into them. It's not difficult to actually pull out the data, but it's a bit painful to pull all the data and migrate to a new provider, right? So lock-in is a problem. Again, it might not be a problem for most of you, but it's one of the factors that you have to consider, right? So the next one is do it yourself, right? So what this basically means is if you are an open source, or let's say if you know enough of Linux, right? Or if you don't really have to be an administrator yourself, but if you are a Linux guy yourself, and then you know how to deal with open source, licensing stuff a bit, right? Then, in our view, you can actually do the whole thing yourself. And this presentation mainly is about that. I mean, the reason it's about that is because we have done it this way, right? So why would you actually do it? Well, it could be many reasons. Cost could be one big factor. The other reason could be just that you want the whole thing in your control as you go along. The other reason could be that as you're going along, you want to really scale up, right? So you might actually think about, hey, I'm paying like $10 or let's say $5 to $6 per user for this particular user for this solution. Now, if I want to scale up, I really have to pay more money, but then I have to buy the solution from here and from here and from here. The whole thing adds up a lot of cost for me, right? So control, cost, integrated solution could be the factors, right? And then you really want to have an integrated solution. So these could be the things why you want to kind of go with do-it-yourself solution, right? So what would it take actually to create a solution for yourself? First and the foremost, right? You need hardware equipment. Now, Do you really want to go and then buy the hardware and then set up the backup? And especially in India, right? I mean, you really cannot have that kind of backup that you require for electricity. And Bangalore, all of you know, the power just goes off like that, and then your systems are down, and people are not able to work, and then your whole work just breaks down, right? So go with any cloud-based provider, right? Buy the hardware from there. And the cloud-based providers can just, and of course you have to have a domain name or some IP address where you also go and buy the solution from, right? And then you can just go with any other well-known cloud-based providers, right? I just named 3 of them here, right? It's very easy. I'm not sure if anyone of you have used Amazon or GoDaddy. Nowadays it's very easy. Just in Amazon, for example, just register yourself. You have to have your credit card, of course, and then you can have on-demand instances, you can have reserved instances, and you can have on-spot instances. There are lots of ways that you can actually buy the hardware infrastructure for them. And the hardware infrastructure is as is that once you configure the infrastructure with Ubuntu or something, it's as good as you're remotely logging into that Ubuntu machine and everything is just there, except the UI, of course. If you want the UI, you can still do that. You can get the pipeline for X to pass all the way from the server to your client, but typically servers, they don't require the UI, right? But it's very easy. So all you need is a hardware infrastructure, a domain name that can link to your hardware, IP address or some domain name that you have bought, right? And for IT infrastructure, you can still do with an IP address, but it might look a bit not so great. So buy some, for your company, you can have a small domain name which would actually lead to your IT infrastructure itself, right? And then choose one of the operating systems. I mean, choose any operating system you want. I mean, open source, of course, typically it would be Linux-based operating systems. So Ubuntu, CentOS, any of these, right? So these elements will actually set up the complete core hardware infrastructure plus software infrastructure on top of which you can start deploying your IT services, right? So, and then the next thing is you really have to plan the layout. Now, I have taken the examples of few elements that we thought are required for us as a startup, right? And for you, it might be a bit more, but then you really have to plan the layout. You cannot just start off with randomly, okay, I deploy this and then I deploy that, and later you will actually figure out, hey, how do I actually connect these two things, right? So you have to plan the layout in such a way that, okay, I have a user database, right, which will basically hold the complete user data. And then I have this various pieces of things that do a lot of things, right? You have the source code control, and we have used Git, Git being very flexible, dynamic and distributed source development methodology. I mean, it provides this kind of way of doing things. And then you have a way of reviewing the code. No matter what you think, it's better to actually let the code, any code that is developed, to pass through a review tool, right? It always eases your life. Even if you would review the code or not, at least you have a gate that basically says, not everything that you just develop and dump it goes to the source code, but it goes through some set of eyes for a review, right? And then you have a continuous integration. So once you actually create the code and then you start pushing the code, it's been reviewed, it says merged. The moment it is merged, you have to have a process that kicks in and starts the continuous integration, right? And then you'll have a bunch of automated test cases that just run on this code that has been developed. So you'll have a test management that basically kickstarts the running the test cases, right? And then if there are any bugs or issues that have been seen in this test, then you could either kick them into, raise as a bug, or you can just send an email to the people who have just committed the code saying, you know what, your build or your code commit has just broken a few of the test cases, please go and fix them, right? And this will be the left side of it is basically the things that help the developer, but on the other side are also the things that also actually help the developer as well as everyone else in the company, right? So you'll have a wiki. So I have been a proponent of not using documents because it's been a really painful thing for me all of my life that if I want to find something, it's really difficult to actually go and then search which documents have got the data. So use wikis, blogs. I mean, these are the ways to actually go forward in my view because it's very easy to index them, search them, update them. It makes your life really easy, right? And then as a company, I mean, you might actually not find this intranet thing very useful, but as you go along, you might want to have a mechanism that you set up your intranet, and then you post some messages for your company so that people in the company can make use of it and so on. As a small company, you don't really need this intranet, frankly speaking, because what? I mean, you just are like 5 to 10 guys, and then you sit in a room, or you can call each other, you can talk to each other. But as you keep on growing, how do you communicate with each other is a question. You cannot keep on sending a bunch of emails to all the company employees saying, this is an update and that's an update and so on, right? Have an intranet ready. The moment you start using it, you'll feel it's good, right? Definitely email, it's a must. You cannot give up nowadays. So you need an email tool. And the other thing is the chat tool. I mean, open source also teaches people the way to communicate over geographical boundaries, right? If you're in the same geographical boundary of in the same room, you don't really need a chat tool. You just have to ping the guy next to you and then say, hey, can we get this thing resolved, and then all the stuff. But then if you are geographically distributed, then a chat tool always helps, right? So have this ready. You don't have to use it immediately, but this is important to list it down here, because this actually drives your infrastructure needs, right? You have to make the choice of the tool important. It makes the choice of the tool really important here, right? So for the things, the blogs that I have shown earlier, these are the choices that we have made as a company, right? For users, for employee management, LDAP, it's been proven, it's been working since a long time. There are various flavors of LDAP itself. Microsoft has it's called Active Directory, right? It's just a flavor of LDAP, but the way the things are organized is still the tree structure, right? And in the open source world, you have something called as OpenLDAP. It's a very de facto LDAP management or user management software available out there. It's very lightweight, scales up really well. You can have your own backend database, be it BDB, be it whatnot, to scale it up, right? And then open source source control management, Git has been our tool of choice or source code of choice, but you can go with SVN or CVS. I don't know if CVS anyone is even using it nowadays, right? But again, along with Git, I would really suggest you to go with Gerrit, which is a Google layer on top of Git. It's nothing but a layer, which basically provides a mechanism for code review, right? Before it actually goes and sits into the final repository. That's how I actually see it. It provides a bit more few other functionalities, but the most important thing for me there is code review, right? And the next thing for test management is what we have chosen is TestLink. It's pretty well, it's being used pretty decently, and then you can pump in all your test cases that you require, and then manage them effectively as per the releases, as per the features, and as per UI and so on, right? And for bug management, again, anyone would actually recognize it very easily, Bugzilla. So that's a very de facto, well-established software. It's being used by lots of, in fact, commercial companies, right? And it's been proven to be working really well, right? So Bugzilla is again a straightforward tool. Jenkins, earlier it was known as Hudson, but because of name conflict, they changed the name to Jenkins, right? Is the continuous integration tool, which has the capability of pulling in the code from any known source control, like be it Git, SVN, and so on, into Jenkins, and then it has a capability to kickstart your continuous integration scripts. Create a build on which you can even run some EMMA or find bugs kind of tools, or your own automation tests, and even generate your complete test report. So gone are the days when there used to be dedicated people who just sit there, run the test cases, mark them manually in some Excel sheets, and then generate a graph or something for the management to look at and say, hey, this is where we are and all that stuff. So how many people's time are actually spending? You have a guy who runs the test cases, you have a guy who probably actually pulls in the test case results, mashes up into some sort of data and some PPTs and so on, and then he pushes it to the management. Wasted effort. I mean, like, as a startup, you cannot just have that kind of freeway or to actually spend that kind of money for people to do that kind of things. So Jenkins is a very good tool, right? It's very powerful, and the best part is it has got lots of plugins for everything, almost everything, right? It's got plugins for Git, it's got plugins for SVN, it's got plugins for showing nice graphs, it's got plugins for sending emails to people whom you want to, and all that stuff. All you have to do is just choose a plugin, deploy it, and then start using it, configure it, and just start using it. And that's it, right? So that's what Jenkins is about. And then you have Agile Fant. So Agile Fant is a Scrum management tool. It's an open source tool. And the reason I picked this, at least for the company, is because I have used it, or actually I was responsible, or was also involved in the development of Agile Fant. So this is actually a tool that comes from Finland, University of Finland, right? And then it's a very good tool for Scrum management. It's a lightweight tool. It doesn't have all the fancy stuff, but it just gets the things done, right? So here you can actually add all your user stories. You can add all your requirements there, put them as backlogs, add the people that you want, and all that stuff, right? And the last one is the Tiki. So the intranet part I was talking about is where you can actually, Tiki is a content management system. It's very powerful. So you can actually, again, Tiki goes with plugins. It goes with a very flexible configuration mechanism. So it also has got a specific link that says, use this for setting up your intranet. It sets up your default links and everything. It sets up blogs, wikis, and all that stuff. So all your document management automatically goes into Tiki, right? So these are the choice of tools that we have made as a company. But again, you're not restricted by this. This is just a snapshot that you might go ahead and give it a try. For example, instead of Tiki, you can go with MediaWiki. That's also a very well established media wiki or wiki processing tool, right? Okay, and the other one I just missed out is Citadel. So the email part, right? Now, as a company, you have multiple choices. Now, you might actually go with Google apps for small business, or you might actually go with Microsoft 365 or some other Zoho-like kind of company to deploy your email server. But you also have the choice of deploying Citadel as an email server and still get almost all the kind of nice features that you want, right? So what Citadel provides is an email server, and it also has got a collaboration tools like IM chatting based upon the emails and so on, right? And it is a well-established software again. Just give it a shot, and then at least we have used it. It works pretty well. So in order to actually deploy all the things that I just talked about earlier, what are the basic things that you need? We said that we need this server, we need the OS, Ubuntu, CentOS, or whatever. You would also need some basic tools and frameworks that you actually build on top, right? The basic things, LAMP stack, the Apache server, web server, you need the Apache Tomcat, you need PHP, MySQL, Perl. I mean, at least, I'm not sure if I missed something here, but these are the things that you mostly need to just get your things done, nothing more. And given the way the OSs right now, they're pretty good. I mean, for example, Ubuntu provides this aptitude system for package management and all that. If you just use aptitude, installing these plus the ones before is just walk in the park, right? So all you need to do is sudo apt-get install Apache 2, for example, sudo apt-get install MySQL, and that's it. And then sudo, and most of the packages I just showed earlier, all this can also be installed just with apt-get. Some may not, but most of them are. And once you actually install them, some even have a mechanism to even configure them while you are installing them, right? So installing them is not a big problem at all, right? But there are a few things that you might actually want to look out for, and these are the things where we spend most of the time. I'll also come to the amount of time we actually spend doing this, right? But these are the things where it took time for us to set up, but it's worth it, right? LDAP. Now every tool has got its own way of connecting to LDAP, right? And LDAP being the most popular, every tool tries to be compatible with it, right? And because of that, you might end up configuring one tool in one way, the other tool in one way, but then once you have the domain name set and the user profile set, it's very easy to kind of plug them in, right? But that's one place where you really want to kind of focus and have someone who already knows LDAP, and then it becomes your life, it makes your life easy, right? Jenkins with Git is again something, it's easy to do, but at the beginning it might actually look, oh, actually, will it even work? Yeah, it actually works, right? So, but then it makes your life really easy. So that's one more place, but then it's a bit tricky to configure. Jenkins, at least, once you actually get it set up and running, you don't even have to touch the server anymore. But then the configuration with Git is a bit tedious. There are things that are hidden that are mandatory that you would not realize them as mandatory, right? That's some improvement I think Jenkins guys have to use or prepare for better user experience, right? The most important thing, security. It's a huge topic in itself, but I'm just touching on just 4 simple points, right? Now you as a company, you might actually want to go with a secure VPN kind of infrastructure where you don't want to expose your infrastructure to outside your intranet. Typically that's how companies work, right? You have your intranet and then you have internet outside your intranet. And you don't want these things to mingle just because of security reasons, right? Now there are ways you can do it. You can go with Amazon VPN services, right? VPN cloud, where if you actually buy the cloud, then you'll have your own private infrastructure, and then which is protected from the public internet. And then you can use VPN to connect to the infrastructure, and then from there onwards you are inside the intranet, and from where you can access all the services that you have, right? That's one way of doing things. The other way is just deploy the services on public internet, protect them with password, username password, right? For example, even if you go with any of the public services where you're going to buy them online, right? For example, Zoho or Google Apps and so on, even they are like password protected. So you have to basically set the strength of your password of the users properly so that they don't use silly passwords that can be easily broken, right? So ensure that only well-known ports are open, right? Most of the times when you actually buy the infrastructure from any of the cloud providers, they provide a very nice UI for you to configure the ports so that not every port is exposed to the outside world. Just don't give a very wide range saying 0 to whatever you're open, right? Specifically open those ports where you think are needed. Just don't expose every other port. It's dangerous, right? And never save any of the passwords in plain text inside the IT infrastructure, right? And never expose any SSH kind of connections to your infrastructure apart from just for the admin user. You can protect them using the SSH keys, for example. Don't allow everyone and anyone to log into the system using SSH. I don't know if you have a mechanism where your product requires that someone remotely logins to a server and then does his work, you might want to set it up separately than your core IT infrastructure, right? And then choose a well-tested, stable Linux kernel. So 11.04 LTS of Ubuntu is, for example, has been stable since a very long time. It's got long-term support. It's going to remain there for a bit more time. 12.04, well, it's been recently released, but it's a bit shaky. The kernel still has to be hardened a bit. So go with something that has been proven, well established, so that you don't have to have all those security patches and you don't have to worry about that at all, right? So these are the small lookout points that you have to worry about or you have to keep in mind while you are choosing the OS, right? So as with the other one, this also has got negatives and positives. I'll just start with the positives, right? It's in your control. You can create a complete integrated solution, right? You don't have to go to someone and buy bits and pieces from each and every one of them, right? One single integrated solution for the whole thing. It's a fixed cost and it doesn't increase with the number of users. I'm going to come to some statistical small cost values, right? But most of the times it's just a fixed cost. And the cost is mainly for the hardware infrastructure and the cloud that you actually spend on the cloud provider, right? And once it is set up properly, there's absolutely no maintenance required because the expectation is that the whole machinery just keeps on running smoothly. Just smooth, right? There's a huge saving cost saving. Definitely I can say that we are actually able to save more money by doing this than actually going with individual providers, right? And then it can scale up or down. When your company is actually scaling up with more number of employees and people and so on, it's easy to scale up. And of course, the other side is also possible, right? And all the open source components that are just free of cost. There's no cost involved in buying the software. And the IT infrastructure is actually in your control. If you want to take a backup, if you want to just move, if you want to shut down something, you can do whatever you want, right? There are also negatives involved. So the admin and Linux technical competence is required. So I wouldn't actually call it as admin because gone are the days when people actually are scared about Linux. That's my view, right? Earlier, the Linux kernel, the tools and everything used to be really scary that people used to think you really have to be a geek and you really have to be deep into the Linux thing to actually understand and do it. But those are old days. Nowadays, it's got such a good documentation that anyone, everyone who just can read, just go ahead and do it, right? But then you really need Linux competence to do it, right? The deployment planning has to be done in-house. Do it properly, and if you don't do it properly, then that might actually be a nightmare for you as you go forward, right? And then the initial setup overhead. So you would spend time to actually do the initial setup, and how much time I'm just going to talk to you, right? But these are the things or the negatives that I actually see from doing it yourself kind of perspective for your IT infrastructure. So what's the ROI? What am I gaining out of this DIY process, right? Now, these statistics that I've actually listed on here is something that we have done for our company, right? So what we have done is we just took a cloud infrastructure server, and that costed us and it's a dedicated server. It's not even a virtual instance. It's a dedicated hardware machine that we actually bought because we thought we need this dedicated instance for ourselves, right? We spent about 35,000 rupees per year. And if you actually buy over a period of years, it would actually be less. So we actually bought it over a period of years, but for this instance, I just put it per year, right? And we actually bought it for 3 years, if I remember right. And then it's a dedicated server, dedicated hardware server that resides with a cloud provider, and the cloud provider is responsible for providing all the basic security, the backup, and everything, right? We don't have to worry about that. So what is the configuration for that? It's a 2 GB RAM, 400 GB hard disk, 3.2 megahertz dual core processor, and all that stuff, the backup and so on, right? And this actually is able to scale pretty well for us. All we had to do after setting the whole thing is just keep on adding users as we keep on adding employees, right? And what's the time to set up the whole tools? So you might actually think, hey, I mean, it's a big thing and all that stuff. Once the infrastructure is bought, it took just 1 day to install all the tools themselves, right? Because all you have to do is sudo apt-get, and you have everything installed, and then comes the configuration part, which is the most trickiest part, and that's exactly where you have to be careful. It's not about careful, it's just how do you plug in the stuff. So it took approximately 3 weeks for the whole thing to be set up because we are doing it for the first time, right? We are not any admins who have done it earlier many number of times that we could actually just do it on the fly. And the most trickiest part was actually the configuration. So I have my LDAP server, I have to plug in my Bugzilla into this, I have to plug in my Tiki into that, and so on, right? And then I have my Jenkins, which could, and then what you have to do is, you already have your source code that people are developing already, right? Deploy the source code in your Git repository, get a snapshot of it into your Jenkins, build it, and then finally have an image for everyone else to download, right? All this process has to be smoothly set up. Those are the trickiest things that it took time for setting up. So majority of the time went into LDAP integration in Jenkins plus Git. That's what it was, right? And the average maintenance effort, that's again one thing you would actually wonder. What does it take for me to maintain over a period of time? I just put it 0.1 days because when I said 3 weeks, right? Any time that we spent after that was roughly 1 week after that, I just divided by the number of months we are running until now. It came up to 0.1 or less than that, but I just took 0.1 there to not undervalue what you might actually be doing. So it's about 0.1 days per month of effort that you would spend on any maintenance task. And frankly speaking, since the last 3 to 4 months, we haven't touched any infrastructure and it's just running smoothly. All we did was to just add users, right, to what we have. So what is the currently serving number of users? We have about 12 users, right? We are a startup, we are starting up, 6 months old, and then we have 12 people in the organization. The Atlassian Jira, I just made a small statistics. It would cost about $50 per month. I just took it from their website, and then that would end up paying approximately 33,000 per year, which is not bad compared to what you have for 35,000 what we have paid per year. But Atlassian doesn't provide everything that I just mentioned earlier. It just provides a few pieces of it, right? But here we have everything. So what are the decision-making factors for you to go? And again, these are the factors from my point of view, but your mileage might actually vary and you might have a bit different kind of requirements, right? So off the shelf, you've got a good amount of money, you're not worried about locking in or all that stuff, and some startups are also like, okay, let me create this product for 1-2 years, and then let me sell it off to someone, and then I'm done, right? So it all depends on what you actually need. So you're okay with different kind of separated systems. And so buy on-the-shelf solution or just go with some vendor just will work for you, right? But if you have a long-term product plan, if you have to build, if you have a plan to build your company large scale and add people and build a really an organization, not just a company, then you better go with do it yourself, because you want things to be in your control, and definitely money is a factor to begin with in the beginning, and you don't want to be locked in, right? So that's the end of the presentation. So this is something that comes straight from what we have done, personal experience.